You got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. Hurt my feelings.
Welcome back to another episode of Dynasty Theory. Thanksgiving is upon us, Dan. We really should be giving thanks, but we're kind of putting our Grinch hats on here. We're talking about some players that maybe we're not necessarily thankful for 12 weeks into the 2024 fantasy football season. Some of our biggest disappointments. Don't forget, like the video below, leave a comment, let us know who some of those players are that might be some of your biggest disappointments, and then make sure you head over to ddfantasyfootball.com and use code Theory. The link is in the episode description below, and you get 50% off your first month. What's going on, Dan?
Man, I'm definitely thankful for all the feedback we got in the Discord. There was a lot of players rattled off that our fantasy community was disappointed in. I am thankful going into Thanksgiving, JB. I think anyway, like my Dallas Cowboys definitely fit the category of disappointment this season, but I got to pull the swag out of the closet because it was buried for about a month. And the only thing is like that hurt their draft status there. So I don't know if I'm thankful or disappointed. I don't know. You tell me.
You'll still be able to get Genty there. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Fingers crossed.
Now, what we did, we're talking about our disappointments, and we kind of can go in a few different directions. And I think tonight's episode, not that they're all not conversational, but I think tonight's episode is going to be more so that way. It's not going to be as nitty gritty down to the numbers, analytically speaking, but really just talking about up to this point, like I said, 12 weeks in through the fantasy football season, who are some of the biggest disappointments? But if we can try to get into the why behind it, like there were preseason expectations, we were expecting things from these guys and they have not produced. So whether it is a veteran, a win now piece that we were looking to get some contributions from, they haven't produced and they haven't paid dividends, or maybe it was a dynasty asset. And Dan, I know some of the players you're going to be talking about are dynasty assets that maybe you really didn't need much from this year, but you were just hoping for a little bit and it hasn't really come to fruition and it's impacted their value. Well, I put this out in the Discord, like Dan mentioned. Here are the players, and I'm just going to rattle through them. This is how much disappointment there is this year. Are you ready? Aiyuk, Laporta, Tyreek, Olave, Stroud, Zamir White, Javonte, Kincaid, every tight end not named Bowers or McBride. That was one of the responses. Addison, Waddle, Richardson, Dallas, all of Dallas, Etienne, Debo, Brooks, Marv, Devin Singletary, Xavier Worthy, Tank Dell, Rodgers, Deontay Johnson, Patrick Mahomes. I want to get into a few of them later, and that's one of them. DJ Moore, Trevor Lawrence, Pat Freiermuth, Jaden Reed. Dan, like, have you found, and again, it's always recency bias, I feel like, but have you found there have been a lot more bumps in the road this year, whether it's injury or just disappointment from underperforming than we've seen in recent years?
It does, especially after that list of names that our Discord provided for you. Our community like gracefully provided. You could tell there was a lot of frustration there.
And there was no lull. I posted it. I you give the at to everybody. It was just like boom, 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 boom. Everybody was ready to air their grievances.
Right? No hesitation. So I think it was a therapy session in the Discord. I think there were a lot of commonalities. Like there were a lot of those players were listed multiple times and may have been on our list. So I think we definitely agree. I do take, maybe with a grain of salt, hey, we got a large Discord community, so that is going to, rack up a lot of names. I think there's a lot of names that have also surprised us this year and have helped our rosters. That's not the subject of tonight's episode, but so I'm thinking maybe a future episode, maybe that balances things off. I'm not sure, but I've definitely felt the impact. There's definitely, it was not hard at all. This week's homework assignment of giving you some names of players that have disappointed me. Quickly came up with an honorable mention, as did you. So I think, yeah, JB, when I look at it in that light of being able to rattle off a top 5 and come up with an honorable mention, it's been a heavy impact of guys that for some reason or the other have let down our rosters. And, I try to break it down. Like I didn't want to just put guys in there because they got hurt and they're out for the year. Like that could happen at any time. But guys that are healthy, guys that have had at least enough health and availability, and aren't meeting expectations. I looked at, what investment I may have had in that player. Do I think there's going to be a return on investment later on down the line? So I'm still thinking it's going to be safe or okay, but there's some guys, man, that really, really let down.
That was my thing too. You made a really good point. I was kind of thinking about this when I was going through my list, but is there going to be time for a value bounce back? So like one of the names that I have as an honorable mention, Dan, you have him too. He popped up in the Discord, but like CJ Stroud, like, yeah, he's been a disappointment, but really, let's take production away here for a second. He's still going like he's a top 7 quarterback for dynasty value from that train of thought. But the production hasn't been there, but he's obviously super young. We saw high impact production early on in his first year, and it's just kind of come back down here in year 2. So that I was kind of hesitant to put players like that on the list because yes, there's no way you can look at CJ Stroud and say, this dude has not been a disappointment, because he has. That expectation was so high. I saw him go in startup stand ahead of Josh Allen. I'll have to pull it up. I saw it come up where he was going ahead of Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and I'm sure there's still some folks that would say, "Oh yeah, I'd rather have CJ Stroud," but you need to be able to adjust. But that's why I was a little hesitant to put players like CJ Stroud, and you kind of hit the nail on the head with, well, they're still young enough. You have the value insulation. Maybe you didn't get the production, but that could always bounce back. Yeah,
he didn't make my top 5 because of all the reasons you mentioned. He made the honorable and I think like a lot of it's offensive line related, offensive coordinator. Okay, hopefully he can make some adjustments in the future, but he's still talented. He's still making some plays. Crushed my Scott Fishbowl dream, so he definitely made my honorable mention for that. But again, he's one that I think the talent's still there. I don't think he's a player that like we see this in like a Justin Herbert who's had his ups and downs based on health, based on coaching, those kind of things. I think it's just more a product of the current environment and some injuries. When Nico is out, those things kind of hurt him, but I think he's going to be fine. But definitely understand the disappointment from our dynasty community.
Yeah, you lose Diggs. Like you come in, you think, okay, we have these 3 receivers ready to go. Tank Dell was banged up. You lose Diggs. Nico was out. So really building chemistry here, especially with Diggs, where obviously things were going, and then now he's out for the season. But those things come into play.
Yeah, I think with the offensive line so bad, maybe some of the disappointment is like you kind of hope certain quarterbacks could overcome some of that O-line issues and still put up some good productions. And when the O-line's been real bad, he's kind of just been average. And I think that's a little bit of disappointment because he's been drafted like an elite quarterback.
And we talk about this too, where it's like players like, and I can already tell the type of episode this is going to be, Dan, where you say something and it's one of those shows where boom, it get something in my brain going. It's just going to be like ping pong back and forth. I think we might not even really get into many of these players. I don't know. But we're talking about CJ Stroud. Whenever you have a player that was so highly sought after very early in their career and you saw some production, it's very easy for them to bounce back from a value perspective. It is very easy. So if there's a player that was there before, they produce, they had the value, they're young, they have the insulated value, like Justin Herbert, that's the perfect example. He dropped outside of the top 40 in fantasy calc overall value when you look at it with Superflex settings. And now he's back up there to 18th overall. After several games of, okay, maybe they're not going to be as run heavy as we expected, or maybe Justin Herbert is just going to be that efficient, or he's going to use his legs more. But that's something to keep in mind when we talk about these players where it's a disappointment that they could certainly bounce back. Anyway, enough of CJ Stroud. I didn't think we were going to talk that much about him, but I think there's a larger point to be made there. And I always try to We talk about specific players and specific trades, but how can we cast a wider net and really look at things from a more macro level that's going to impact, like if you don't have CJ Stroud on your roster, you're like, I don't care about a CJ Stroud conversation, but maybe you have Jaden Daniels on your roster and he goes through a sophomore slump next year, and it's obviously very different players, but it could be a similar cycle. All right, Dan, hit me with your number 5 here. And I'm going to challenge you throughout this list, but to a disclaimer, I do like it overall.
Okay. And there were a couple of these where I could have went either way. I could easily swap them out in my honorable mentions. But I always, for our dynasty owners, it's like putting it in the shoes of your portfolio. So over the course of my, close to 20 dynasty rosters, these guys have let me down for a various amount of reasons. Number 5 on the list, we're going from worst to the biggest disappointment. But number 5 on the list was at the wide receiver position. And it's my boy, Amari Cooper. All right, got the jersey up behind me there, the signed jersey, former Cowboy days. Love him. And with that, I just still had a lot of shares. And I think the disappointment for me is, even though, I didn't expect him to be prime Amari Cooper in those, elite Dallas years, he was Cleveland's number 1 receiver. Even though I wasn't high on Deshaun Watson, someone had to catch the balls. He ended on that great note last year with Joe Flacco. He had that big 20 catch performance. I'm like, all right, there's still some juice in this guy, but I'm disappointed. 1, he has not produced like we hoped. 2, he's at that age range where normally on my dynasty rosters, JB, I'm really good at getting out before they get too old. Not all my rosters, but a lot of them I am aggressive in trading my draft picks. And I do that with a premises of I'm keeping a very young roster. So if I don't have a lot of draft capital coming up the next year, I'm not still stuck with this aging roster. Now Cooper's, he's entering that 30-year-old range where at some point the wheels could fall off, and I'm hoping I'm not stuck. He gets traded to Buffalo, which awesome. Now I'm thinking, did I miss that 1 week window where he got traded to Buffalo to go to Josh Allen, where I should have traded some more shares then, and I didn't. And then he gets this wrist injury, and that
in that first game, he had 4 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah, right. He didn't even know the full playbook then. So that was the window to say, hey, this could be a nice little ride with Josh Allen. Let me get out while the stock is high. And, I move off that 30-year-old receiver. Instead, I still have a lot of shares of Amari Cooper, JB, and we haven't seen anything in Cleveland or Buffalo that really excites me. Now, hey, I'm still hoping it's just a health thing, but there's only so many games left in the season for him to get right. It's impacted, certain rosters that he just hasn't done much for me all year. And I'm really wondering what the future of Amari Cooper is because, do the Bills re-sign him, or was this just for a win now? And who knows where he goes next year. So he was number 5. I had much higher expectations where he could still be an anchor in my receiving rotation, be competitive, and it just hasn't materialized.
When I go through these show notes and I give you and Mitch prompts every single week, I'm very critical of the responses you guys give. You know that. So when I saw Amari Cooper on the list, initially, I thought there's no way we can say he's a top 5 disappointment. But you got me thinking, and I was like, well, yes, we have the broader scale of overall disappointments, but I like the way you went into this with your portfolio, because I guarantee a lot of the answers we got from the DD Fantasy Football Discord members, it was very personal for them. It was who hurt them, not necessarily the biggest disappointment, just overall. And I like that personalization. So, in the Discord, you saw somebody said Zamir White, and it's like, are they really that big of a disappointment? Is he really that big of a disappointment? But for a lot of people, he was. Because there was that hope. So once I kind of put that hat on, if you will, I was a little more forgiving of Amari Cooper being here. And like you said, he's a free agent after this year. He's going to be 31 years old, 9.6 points per game in PPR formats. That's wide receiver 49 on a per game basis. When you look at these players, and from my list, and we'll be very quick through my list because I like the names that you brought. I really want to dissect them. Mine, nobody really cares about them, and I don't want to give you a chance to dissect any of them personally. That's the real
come
thing.
on, man. I felt like I just was on a game show with a very tough host, and I didn't get voted off the island, selling you on why Amari Cooper should be number 5. So I feel very accomplished right now, but I'll run with that.
But I mean, there's guys across my portfolio, like we were talking about Courtland Sutton in the Game Day channel yesterday, and it looks good because he's producing. But if he didn't produce with my exposure, I would say he would be somebody that I could consider, even though he's not necessarily like a highly valued player. And if he didn't produce, you're like, okay, but you were spending like a second on him maybe, so it's not really that big of a deal. I remember preseason, we were talking about Amari Cooper, and I mentioned tearing down from him getting a second, and you and Mitch, you teamed up on me as you typically do, and you were very quick to say, I wouldn't trade him for a pair of seconds. I wouldn't tear down and get a second added. And, that would have worked out well in this situation. Now there's many more where you guys were spot on and I was completely off.
I like how you save that receipt, and I would be salty, but that does help express my point of my disappointment. That was the hope. I couldn't sell him for that at that point. And in hindsight, maybe I should have, but I'll still be that stubborn Cooper owner and hope there's more production ahead.
Yeah. So it's like, what was the expectation? What price point did you get in at? And then where are we here 12 weeks into the season? And once a lot of the players on my list, I want to go back to my list really quick. They are players that, for the most part, you could look at as more win now pieces, not necessarily dynasty prospects. Like I had 3 running backs, also an older wide receiver, and then 1 tight end that we'll get to eventually. But it's like you acquired these guys, you paid a price because you thought they were going to set you apart and make you a contender. And those are the ones that really hurt, because if you get a win now piece and they don't produce, the value's shot. Like you can't get a second for Amari Cooper, I don't think right now. In many spots. I don't think you can. Where do I have him right now?
Not for a second you would want. Like we normally say we want that early mid second. You wouldn't get that. Maybe you might get a late second in a certain spot, a contender that just needs some depth.
Right. And I have him tiered with that middle 2025 second. So that's kind of the point where I would sell for that mid 25 second. Can I move a late second plus? So I say you can't get a second. You couldn't get a mid second, I don't think. It takes one game for him to pop off. Like you could write this off to, well, Cleveland was very dysfunctional. Then he unexpectedly got traded, and then he got injured. So you could kind of write that off. And if he has one good game when he comes back, you might be able to sell him off. So we'll see how that goes.
He's at Trey Tucker production right now for the season, so something's got to give. But are we going to your number 5 now? Are we going to do it that way? 5-4 each. What do you want to?
We can. I have a lot more notes on your players.
That's fair. I mean, we said we were only going to touch on some of them to be able to get through the show here. We're going to emphasize some more players. So maybe you emphasize who you want to emphasize, JB, but we'll just maybe touch on them in that order.
Right. I've one guy a little bit later. So number 5 for me, Travis Etienne. I still had an expectation that he was going to produce. We saw what Tank Bigsby offered last year. And there's been a ton of improvement there, a ton of improvement. The Tank Bigsby we see today is the one that me and a lot of folks, that was the expectation coming into the NFL. And it didn't come to fruition in the first year, but now it did. And Travis Etienne hasn't been producing when he was healthy, but then he was banged up a lot, shoulder, hamstring. We're getting 8.3 points per game from him, running back 39. At the price point I was paying during the offseason to acquire, where other folks were paying to acquire, we are extremely disappointed. And I can say there were probably very few members of the Travis Etienne fan club still attending meetings.
100%. Now he didn't make my top 5 because if we talk about that personal value, my investment wasn't as heavy in him, but he did make my honorable mention, and that if like my top 12 running backs going into the season, he was in the back half of that top 12. You were kind of moving him around and that kind of thing. So anybody that's going to be you have a top 12 rating on is 39 at this point in the season. That's a bust. And I'm a little bit concerned because when and I'm trying to weigh in, okay, hey, the Jags are a mess. But when they have had anything going, it's been Bigsby and not Etienne, and he's really kind of seemed to fallen out of favor. So I'm not out on him, but I'm heavily concerned, and it's definitely been a bust to this point in the season.
No, if I could get, I don't see why he shouldn't be in the same price point as Amari Cooper, to be honest with you.
He's a lot younger, though.
Yeah, but at the running back position, that shelf life is so much shorter.
True.
And we are getting such an influx of talent. I don't see a world yes, Travis Etienne is there through 2025, but we've seen crazier things happen with contracts. Hell, Daniel Jones just got released on the second year of his contract. So we don't know how that's going to play out in Jacksonville if he's even there in 2025.
I got to challenge this a little bit, though, and I know we don't want to spend too much time on ETN, but how could someone drop that much at his age?
I don't know.
This is top pedigree high school recruit. This is top pedigree college recruit. This is up to last year, near elite level running. This guy's got some burst. This has to be just a product of the Jaguars and injuries. So I just think a year from now, there's got to be a better situation. So I'd be very careful not to give him away.
I'm not giving him away.
Yeah, but it has to be an early second for me. I need to know I could get something really good. I'm not going to gamble on a mid-late. It's got to be a good second to move him.
And this is one of those things you could, if you were able to trade away ETN at let's say early second value, and you could backfill the position if you need it. Go get Austin Eckler. I've talked about him so many times, and you've scoffed.
Here you go again.
He's giving you just as much, more. Go get a cheaper option that's gonna give you just as much.
If you're looking to win now, yes, you'd want Eckler landed himself in a good fantasy situation with all that receiving work. But long term, I'm not holding on to Eckler, JB.
But even if I'm not looking to win now, building around running backs like Travis Etienne it's not part of the recipe. It's not.
I'd rather Etienne on my roster now than Eckler for next year. For next year, I would rather have Etienne than Eckler.
I'm not. Whoa.
You and I love to. We always go at it with Eckler, don't we?
I was not advocating for Etienne for Eckler. I was saying if you could move Etienne for that early second, and then you could go acquire Eckler at his price, that's something I would look to do.
I needed that clarification. Thank you.
And there's
I was a little concerned.
All right, so that's number 5 for me. Let's go bounce back over to you. And I have a problem with this pick.
I'm going to definitely have to personalize this, and it will explain how he ended up number 4 on my list, because I made a very serious mistake or two, maybe that I will own here on the air, JB. So when we were having startup drafts this offseason, and strategically, after I would get my elite quarterback for my QB1, depending on how the draft fell in some leagues, I was rolling the dice with my QB2. And sometimes I'd be aggressive and take a QB2 and 3, and I either A, drafted the wrong guy, all right, at 2 instead of 3, or I drafted my 2 and 3 and I traded the wrong guy. And the 2 guys I had classified together were Bo Nix and Will Levis. And I have some Bo Nix shares that I'm happily enjoying right now, but I have 2 leagues I could think of. One that JB Nix went right before me, so I had to take Levis, and I had a trade on the table, And in Dan fashion, every once in a while, Coach Dan gets a little greedy, and I just couldn't pull the deal. And I got stuck with Levis, and this other owner is enjoying Bo Nix. In another league, I drafted them both, which is awesome. All right. And Levis has shown a little life recently.
And then you traded away Nix.
But I traded Nix and kept Levis. And, by remorse here, I would much rather have Bo Nix. So Levis, man, it was scary a few weeks ago. Now they benched him for a little bit, brought him back. I'm hoping he's following that Bryce Young category where just maybe with some good coaching and a little time, there's a little bit of hope. But, man, there's never going to be enough hope to say I should not have taken Bo Nix over Will Levis. So that is why he is number 4 on my list of fantasy disappointments. I drank a little too much sleeper Kool-Aid, JB, on Tennessee's investment in him.
Yeah, I mean, and then building around, yes, older pieces, but Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, you get Callahan in it as the coach, you get Tony Pollard, and then you get obviously Tyjae Spears is still there as well. But Will Levis really quick. He's quarterback 32 on the season, 12.3 points per game and +4/-1 scoring. Over the last 3 weeks, 17.6 points per game. Weeks 1 through 9. I said I wasn't going to dive into analytics and all that good stuff, but this is the one player I really want to break things down. Weeks 1 through 9, 66% completion percentage, quarterback 15. Not terrible. 5.6 yards per attempt. Atrocious. Quarterback 35. 5 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. So remember that, Dan, 5 to 7. 10% sack rate. 0.32 fantasy points per drop back. 0.32. That's quarterback 33. 8% turnover worthy throws. And this is all from Fantasy Points. They have a ton of great analytical data available there. But out of 42 quarterbacks that qualified with the threshold I put, that was dead last. Okay. 8%. Now we go weeks 10 through 12. He comes back. Hopefully he's healthy. He's bounced back a little bit. I know it's only a 3-week sample, and don't get carried away. But completion percentage up to 68%. I talked about 5.6 yards per attempt, 9.59 over the last 3 weeks. That's quarterback 3. 5 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. Sack rate is doubled. He's getting sacked 20% of his dropbacks. That needs to be fixed. Absolutely needs to be fixed. But 0.51 fantasy points per dropback. That's up from the 0.32. 2.6% turnover worthy throws. And you might sit here and think, well, maybe he's throwing it underneath, higher percentage throws. His deep throw percentage has actually increased over the last 3 weeks to 14% compared to 12.8%. I'm not saying we should be thrilled with Will Levis. And if this was after week 9, Dan, I would have said, put him on this list. He deserves it. He is not invited to Thanksgiving dinner, especially because he puts the mayonnaise in his coffee. I'm not dealing with that at Thanksgiving, okay? But over these last 3 weeks, he has shown a lot of promise. And I believe with the lack of overall talent in this 2025 rookie class at the quarterback position, unless something happens with a veteran coming in that we just don't see happening, I think Will Levis at least gets one more year to prove himself.
He may have saved his job over the last 3 weeks because they're against winning teams, and that definitely gives you a good argument. And the remaining schedule for Tennessee is pretty fantasy football friendly, which I like. So I am encouraged. But just in not having recency bias, and in no way could you compare him to what Bo Nix has done this year and his long-term longevity.
Absolutely not.
It just sinks me. But like those certain stats, 4 fumbles, a 10-9 touchdown interception ratio. Those first 9 weeks were absolutely brutal. And that's enough to bury a season or make it very hard in a season, depending on how much you're relying on him. I think luckily I haven't had to rely on him too much, although he has come to, revisit my rotation over the last 3 weeks. So Because there is in one league, I've been getting offers for quarterbacks, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to ride out Will Levis after these last 3 weeks of performance and a soft schedule ahead. So, JB, I hear you, but
he has one of the easiest schedules rest of season.
Him and Tony Pollard, man, there's still hope, and I guess Calvin Ridley as well. You have hope for the remainder of the way.
I got to give you the round of applause. I got to give you your flowers for Tony Pollard. He's had a good season. He's had a very good season. And I don't want to say he's been green on the JB cross-positional dynasty tiers for quite some time, but he has been. And I've been drinking the Kool-Aid you've been supplying.
I think a lot of my like Kool-Aid formula, you know how you gotta like mix the sugar and the drink together, and got to just sweeten it just right. A lot of that. I was lucky enough to be a Dallas fan and watch a lot of Tony Pollard, and then we went through that running back market, and I remember Saquon Barkley saying this dude's a top back. So like when you kind of hear his peers saying it, and then my coach and I is seeing it, and then Bill Callahan's the O-line, and he just knows how to get. There's enough of those check marks that said, hey, he's a winner. So he avoided this list, which is good, unlike some of these other guys we're going to talk about.
Speaking of Kool-Aid, this is completely random, but when I was younger, my cousin and I would always have sleepovers, and you just do weird kid things. We would do lemonade stands, right? And we were always trying to make concoctions, like different Kool-Aids, and like we would try it, like it would just be absolutely atrocious, but you always try to find that right mix. Needless to say, being a businessman at a very young age, it wasn't there. I think the lemonade stand closed very quickly, but yeah, just speaking of Kool-Aid and trying to find that right balance, it was tough for me at an early age. It was.
I appreciate that entrepreneurial lesson you passed to our listeners, and I think Kool-Aid should be a future sponsor. We'll see what we could do.
All right. This next one for me, it's strictly based on what we've seen so far. Throw away the injury, throw away being out for so many weeks. Over the last 3 weeks since he's returned, Christian McCaffrey is running back 25, 13 points per game in PPR. Somebody posed a question, should they be looking to acquire Christian McCaffrey? Is he going to be somebody that we believe could put them over the hump? And honestly, I'm not looking to acquire. Even as a contender, like I know the market gets smaller and smaller if you're a contender of teams in your league and pieces available that might be there. I can't pay Christian McCaffrey's current market price that is right now putting him at 31st overall, 6th across the running back position. Either try somebody that's less expensive and you don't have to have so much cost tied into Christian McCaffrey, or just go a different direction, go cross positionally. But I can't invest in Christian McCaffrey. Like, we're not getting the difference making production, and I'm not saying it's all him, but something's got to give, and I'm not looking to acquire Christian McCaffrey at current price. And if you invested in him preseason, you're greatly disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, when we ever talk about Christian McCaffrey in absolutely any format, it's league winner. He is game changer, carries you, but we've also experienced that when we invest in him and these injuries happen, which they have in the past, seasons tend to fall apart. And he is a running back that is starting to age a little bit. Not saying there's not potentially some more good years, but here he comes back after a very concerning injury.
Yeah.
And now the Niners aren't quite the same either. And he's, a good running back, but he's definitely not the Christian McCaffrey we're hoping for. So, JB, I get that. Trent Williams is aging a bit here at left tackle. He's getting hurt now and then. Purdy's injuries are creeping up here and now. The team's got to pay Purdy at some point, and then there's some salary concerns. So there's enough like little red flags there that it's, where's this going with Christian McCaffrey? Still love him, but the price tag is the key point that you made, and he's definitely been a disappointment this season because we've all invested in it. There's high expectations for all of us that have him.
There's only one team that year after year remains unbeaten, never loses. Father Time.
I knew that was coming there.
The game might have to go into overtime. It takes a little bit longer, but ultimately Father Time wins every single matchup. And despite what we've seen from Christian McCaffrey historically, absolute league winner, just not somebody that I'm looking to invest in. Like, if I could go get Derrick Henry at the same price, I'd probably go that direction. If I could get Joe Mixon for a little less expensive, if I could get, James Cook, Josh Jacobs, whatever the case may be, I'm looking to go another direction. I can't buy back in. I've actually moved 2 shares of Christian McCaffrey over the last week on teams that have just been eliminated from playoff contention. And I got, who was it? I got a first, a second, and who was the back? Oh God. Tank Bigsby in one league.
Okay.
Again, I'm out of playoff contention. And in the other league, I got Diggs, a first and a second for McCaffrey and a third, I think, or something like that. So they were 2 shares. I was happy to limit my exposure, but there's still a market. So if you don't believe in him, you're able to cash out still. It's still there.
I might have to take a little look here in leagues where I could still trade, which is most of them other than the safe leagues. Because before he came back, I did try to, what I thought maybe I could get a low market acquire right. McCaffrey. I couldn't get any because the responses I got from most other Dynasty owners is there's no way I'm trading McCaffrey. He's worth this and that. And I'm like, is he? And I was no way I was going to overpay, but he's 28. He'll be 29 next summer. So again, that running back cliff is coming. He's still catching the ball, which we love. So there's still going to be some production this year, but 0 touchdowns in these 3 games. And then he has the Bills and the Bears, which aren't bad, run defenses. Maybe week 15, week 16, you get some softer matchups. I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't know, JB. You're not overpaying, that's for sure.
I'm not a film guru. That's not a surprise. Anybody that knows me knows that. But you can see something. It's not the same. It's not the same.
He's running hard, but I mean, the explosions, we haven't seen anything next level explosion. Again, I don't know how much is that just taking him some time to ramp up because he missed a lot of time. And then how much of that is San Francisco. So again, he's not a player that I'm going to say, hey, it's not going to come back, but there's enough flags there where you're not going to pay those old Christian McCaffrey prices at age 28. No way.
For me, it's an unnecessary risk with the injury and all that, and being a running back. But let's not spend any more time on Christian McCaffrey. Who else do you got at number 3?
Number 3, I think this was a guy that we wanted to hit a little bit more, and he goes under the category of, I'm still optimistic and hopeful for a future return on investment, and I'm not necessarily looking to move him unless I got the ideal, tight end, because we heard the one Discord, unless it's McBride or Bowers, we're out, right? So it's not like there's many places to go on this, but Dalton Kincaid, man, wow, this is a little bit of heartbreak for me because he is a guy that I either drafted very high, traded a lot for. He fit my bucket of, hey, there's like 3-4 tight ends that I really wanted to have or nobody on my roster because we were onto the tight end market the last couple of years, really. Like we knew if you didn't have that elite tight end, you're really rolling the dice of mediocrity and, other than hoping for a couple of sleepers. So Kincaid was a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit more obtainable than a McBride or a Laporta going into the season. Like it was really hard to touch Laporta after his tight end 1 season. Is he taking over at Kelsey? That kind of thing. And we look at the usage in Buffalo and Josh Allen, like this weak receiving core is there. And at no point has Buffalo made him a premier target or option ever. Even when they were struggling, when they were doing well, like I haven't found a path to make me feel uber good about Dalton Kincaid. They'll script up a couple plays to try to get the ball in his hands, but they're like 5-yard play action plays, like really like short get open type things. It's not down the field throws. The red zone production's not there. Like, I don't know. JB, do you have anything in your spreadsheets that are going to make me hopeful, or are you just going to keep me buried here?
No, and this is a player that we've talked about through various episodes over the last 3 months. And I believe he was on one of the last episodes of the off season that we had a little breakdown before joining the DD Fantasy Football YouTube and podcast feed and community. But some of it's puzzling to me with Dalton Kincaid. So he's tight end 20, 8.2 PPR points per game, 18% target share. That's ninth among tight ends. 27% targets per route run. That's seventh. So like when he's on the field, when he's running a route, 27%, that's pretty legit when it comes to tight ends. He's only running 20 routes a game. That's the issue.
This offense is different.
It is. He's got 4 end zone targets. That's tied 7th. 19% first read percentage. That's 7th. 20% air yard share. That's 6th. So, yeah, they're doing a lot underneath with him, but they're still utilizing him down the field a little bit too. And then 0.4 fantasy points per route run, 17th. That drops him down. But, like, it's puzzling because he's getting the usage from a percent standpoint, from a share perspective. It's just that pie is small. Like, yeah, you're getting a decent sized piece of this pie, but it's a tiny pie. It's not like one of those nice big strawberry pies from Eaton Park. They load up on the whipped cream. Do you guys have Eaton Park out there?
We do not, man. We're missing that over here in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. So
it's nothing great, but I love it, and they've got fantastic ranch dressing.
Yeah, you made me sound like I was missing something. Then you're like, it's nothing great, but I love it.
I love it.
I'm not
I
sure.
love it.
All right.
Anyway, but yeah, like that pie, the piece that he's getting, it's a big piece and a small pie. Like the talent is there. That's not the question. And eventually, I think maybe if his price gets low enough because he isn't producing, then he's going to be a prime candidate to go out and acquire. But until we're getting more than 20 routes per game, it's just, I'm not intrigued currently at what it's probably going to cost to acquire, especially in heavy tight end premium leagues.
Yeah, I'm in this like conundrum of I definitely don't want to get out of it. Like I watch the games, I watch him, like he doesn't suck. He looks good. He looks like a very good receiving tight end. It is the James Cook and Josh Allen show, and Khalil Shakir is probably getting the biggest portion of that receiving pie there, and then little splashgate moments from Keon Coleman, and then everybody gets a little tiny sliver of that small pie that we're talking about. But I've got to either just live with it and have those okay moments, and it's better than like goose eggs because he's getting something, or find something attractive that I could somehow pivot off of. Like, and I don't know whether that's, hey, a first round pick where you get the best tight end in this year's draft coming out, or somehow do you package something? Laporta's been equally disappointing. I know a lot of our listeners are like, why are you talking about Kincaid when Laporta's there? And I could have easily put Laporta there. I just had more shares of Kincaid and, a little more heartbreak because I only got 1 or 2 shares of Laporta. So we'll see, JB, but definitely disappointing.
All right. Well, I broke a promise to our listeners. All right. And I'm not happy about it, but again, time was slim today when I pulled in these trades. So I do not have the trades to show on the screen again today. So again, bear with me. I got hollered at last week and I said, I know, I'll get them next week. And I lied. I'm not happy about it, but some trades here. I want to put you to the test, Dan.
All right.
And there's not many trades, so it'll be easier. Kincaid or Calvin Ridley, 14 team, start 8, PPR, only an extra half point for tight ends.
Ugh. You're taking that premium from me, but not completely. I think this goes in that bucket of I will remain stubborn and go with that tight end talent that I just don't want to lose and get stuck with, like Chigaquanko or Dalton Schultz. So I will go with Kincaid, and I'm not going to hop the Ridley train.
Yeah, especially for me, without knowing the league settings, like the starting requirements, 14 teams start 8. It's only 112 starters across the league. So really, like you would think you could get wide receivers. I love Calvin Ridley. Talked about him nonstop in the Discord, talked about him on previous episodes, Sunday episodes, the Start Sit Show, Winning the Week. I've talked about him constantly, but if there's one tight end spot, you have 14 tight ends that have to start. That would make me lean towards Kincaid as opposed to like a 12-team start 10 with the same premium here and same PPR setting that might make this a little bit more even for me. But because of the 14/8 with 14 tight ends at least having to start, assuming one tight end,
right,
then I would lean Kincaid too, despite just the lack of production. Now, like, here's the thing. Let's say you're a contender. You've been looking for a wide receiver. That market is minimal. But you got an offer of Ridley for your Kincaid, and you also have David Njoku. Like, that gets a little tougher then. Because you and I, like, we're looking for those trophies.
Yep. And hey, money talks. And if I had a tight end like Njoku, I could sleep well at night. Because when I look at the guys that are performing ahead of Kincaid, he's one of them that I'd be okay with having. I mean, he's a stud tight end. I'd still rather Kincaid, but if you're going to say, hey, win me money and give me Ridley, I get that because I'll still be solid at tight end. But, I don't want the guys ahead of him like a Zach Ertz who's aging out and, the inconsistencies of the Kyle Pitts of the world. And no, thank you.
The inconsistencies of the Kyle Pitts. I mean, are you talking about Dalton Kincaid still?
Yeah, right. I mean, there's no difference. I'm just still holding on to what I believe talent level is going to be there and tight to Josh Allen. I'm just refused to let that go because, like a lot of these situations will change over time. NFL teams adjust. You've got to make adjustments back. New coordinators come in. A lot of things happen, but as long as Kincaid has Josh Allen, that's something you can't take away. Where like, hey, you're talking about trading for Ridley. Hey, we're still only going on a 3-week sample size of Will Levis here. I don't want to hold on to that. No, thank you.
Yeah, I at times I feel like Dalton Kincaid, Sam Laporta, and Kyle Pitts. You know that Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other.
I got you.
That's what it's like. Those three. All right. Well, number 2 for you is number 3 for me, but Jonathan Taylor. And let me throw some numbers out here, and then Dan, I want to. Actually, we skipped over 2 trades here. What am I doing? I'm so excited to get to Jonathan Taylor.
We'll rapid fire these. Go ahead.
Kincaid, a 25 first and a 25 second, or Trey McBride, 12-team Superflex start 10, 1.5 PPR for tight ends.
What was the premium again for tight ends?
It's PPR, then an extra half point.
Oh, man. I love McBride, man.
He can pop off 10 receptions at any game.
But you're giving me a first and a second next year while keeping me with Kincaid. That's hard to pass up, JB. Oh, man.
You just said we were going to rapid fire this.
You're killing me on this one. Do we know what that first or second is? If someone's given that first and second to get Kincaid, are they contenders?
So,
they got to be a contender.
Let's assume,
they have to
right?
be a contender.
Let's assume they're in play for a first round bye.
Yeah, so this is a really good team. That first and second's going to be late. McBride, just multiple years of production there, man. But it's only a 1.5 premium. He said it's not even full 2.0. Give me the first. I want the first, second, and Kincaid because it's not a full 2.0 premium. If it's full 2.0 premium, I'd roll the dice on McBride.
All right, let me know in the comments, folks.
Oof,
are you Kincaid a first and a second, or McBride 12-team Superflex start 10 PPR, then extra half points for tight ends? And if it depends where that first is, also let us know in the comments where that point is. All right, Dan, Kincaid for Aiyuk in a 26-second 12-team Superflex start 10 PPR half point premium.
I'm gonna go. Oh my god, how many receivers are we starting in that league?
3.
Where were the picks again? The picks were
Aiyuk in a 26-second for Dalton Kincaid.
That's a long time ago and only a second, which is to me the value of a third right now. Aiyuk's off the injury, and we'll talk about his disappointment. I'm gonna go with Kincaid.
All right. Now, your number 2 is my number 3. Running back 23 on the season, Jonathan Taylor, 13.9 PPR points per game. The first 4 weeks, he was running back 7, 18.2 points per game. Yards per carry, fine. Touchdown rate, 3.1%. Nothing out of the ordinary compared to the rest of his career. 0.11 missed tackles forced per attempt. He was at 0.2 last year, 0.17 the year before. So that's come down a little bit. But he has a very nice 6.8% explosive run rate. Those are runs over 15 yards. That's 7th. 70% of the carries inside the 5. His stuff rate, 56%. That's dead last of all running backs with at least 100 carries. Here's the big thing for me. He really is not that much different than who he's been the last 2 seasons. So 2022, 23, and this year. 0.14 targets per route run. Last year, 0.16. The year before, 0.15. In 2021, Dan, he had 21.9 PPR points per game. He got a target on 20% of his routes. That was his 40 reception season, had 18 touchdowns. What are your thoughts here on Jonathan Taylor? Obviously, enough to make number 2 on your list.
Yeah, that special season, I feel like we're holding on to that, and it's time to let go of it because we're drafting him based on that season. And he is a disappointment because he was a top 5 running back for me going into the season, and he is not performing anywhere close to that. And I think if we're going to draft a guy that was in the same breath of, on the cusp of a Gibbs or a Hall, maybe, I would have taken him after them, but he was like nipping at their heels.
Yeah.
And he was the guy that you had to make a decision about between him and Saquon Barkley or Kyron Williams or, he was up there and he's 25 and you spend all that draft capital on him or you trade a lot to get him. And he is the kind of guy where when you draft a running back that high, he has got to produce, and he has not. He had one good game week 3 versus the Bears, like one really good game week 3 versus the Bears. Like that's the production you expect. 23 for 110, 2 touchdowns, caught one ball that game for 25 yards. Other than that, he's cracked 100 yards 3 times barely. He's only found the end zone 5 times, and the receiving chops just have not been there. And for the last 5 weeks, he's had under 10 points, which is beyond underwhelming. He's had some games where we thought he was going to pop off, where he could have popped off, and he didn't. He had a little injury there, for 3 weeks where he didn't even have him. The best ability is availability, and he was unavailable. And we've seen a lot of that from him too over the last, recent sample size of years. So JB, man, that's just underwhelming for such high expectations of Jonathan Taylor. I expect him to be an elite back. Instead, I think he's just a good back, and we don't draft good backs in the top 5, top 10.
Is it crazy at this point in time, if you're contending, and assuming you have Jonathan Taylor, you're probably contending, that you'd want to swap him straight up with Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon? Is that absolutely crazy?
It's not if you're contending, because those guys, they look like dudes. Their run games have not slowed down whatsoever. There's no signs it's going to slow down, and that's the production we drafted Jonathan Taylor for that we need to win our leagues. So I definitely see that. And I have concerns with the Colts too. They're another one of those teams where I think their head coach is going down a path where if they don't figure things out, he could put himself on a hot seat, because I think he's a bright offensive mind that's not a good head coach. That's the category I put him on. And that not good head coach is impacting that bright offensive mind and quarterback questions. And there's a lot of questions there in Indianapolis.
Yeah, like I said, with like Travis Etienne, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, we were investing in these guys because we believed in their production, and we're not getting that, not getting true difference-making production, like 13.9 points per game. Like, yeah, that it's fine, but you could have gotten that for a heck of a lot less than the presumed price that you paid for Jonathan Taylor. So number 3 on my list, number 2 on Dan's list. I don't know, did he come up at all? I don't think that was one. No, nobody in the Discord mentioned him. Again, like he's doing enough, and well, he was doing enough. Like I said, those first 4 weeks, he was strong. And then whereas we talked about Will Levis maybe going in the right direction, Jonathan Taylor, he's gone the other direction. So I think we're going to see some fun trades here either at trade deadlines or if there's no trade deadline and somebody's making a push for the playoffs or trying to cement their position as a bye week team, there are going to be some fun trades. Number 2 for me, and I am shocked. I think this name came up once in the Discord. I was shocked that you didn't have him too. But Tyreek Hill, number 2 for me. He's wide receiver 40 on the season. And I'm sitting here thinking, what's going on? Because Tua's back. He still isn't really making a difference. You look at his weekly stats, right? And let's see. Last 5 games, 13 points, 12 points, 10 points. Had a nice game against the Raiders, 9 points against the Patriots. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, we spoke about Father Time, and he certainly is undefeated, but 0.24 targets per route run. That's where Tyreek's at. And for overall, like, you look at that number and you're like, okay, that's solid for most wide receivers. He was number 1 last year in the league at 0.38. He was targeted on 38% of his routes, 32% 2 years ago. First read percentage when he's to his first read, or the other quarterbacks they had previously in the season, 25%. Last year, 38%. 2022, 37%. And I'm like, well, why? What's going on? Why is this? Jonnu Smith. But listen, Dan, I know it sounds so freaking absurd, right? But when you look across the NFL, and I just talked about this on this week's episode of Winning the Week, you typically on average have about 60% of the total targets go into the wide receiver position group, 20% to running backs, 20% to tight ends. If you see an uptick in either running backs or tight ends, that's got to come from somewhere else. And in this case, it's come from the wide receiver position. Last year, guess what the Dolphins' tight end target share was last year? As a whole position.
The entire share for the entire receiver position.
No, tight ends for the tight end position.
Oh, tight end position. Jeez, do I remember who their tight end? Did they have Gesicki last year? Did they have Gesicki? I'm trying to think who they even had, but he wasn't even what he was this year in these little splash weeks.
Or no, last year was like Durham Smythe and anyway, what was the total? What was the target share percentage?
11%.
9%. Guess what it is this year, Dan? Triple it. 27%.
Oh, wow.
If you look at Jonnu Smith's stats, it's Waddle, Smith, and Tyreek all clumped together in yards, targets, receptions. So you have 27% of the targets going to tight ends this year. That is 5% more than the last 2 years combined for the Dolphins. They have somebody else that is getting the looks from Tua. And I mean, it's like in the movie Step Brothers. Did we just become best friends? Yep. That is Tua and Jonnu. Like, they're skipping down the street together. And Tyreek and Waddle this last week had a nice game, but they're off in the distance just looking, thinking, can't that be me? Can't that be me skipping down the street with Tua? No, there's a new sheriff in town. It's Jonnu Smith.
It just depresses me, any mention of Jonnu Smith, for so many reasons. Like, one, he used to always be my sleeper tight end. Like, I used to love Jonnu with the Titans. He was so fast, man. Like, I even went out on eBay and I have a Jonnu Smith autograph card for some reason in my collection, And then somewhere along the way, you coined me of like an ocean bottom players. And I really tried to cut my depth charts out. And I wrote him off, JB. Like, I completely wrote Jonnu off. I ignored him. I had freebie trades of him. I said, no, I'm just done with Jonnu Smith. And he's been reborn, and I have 0 shares. So I'm so out on it. It's disheartening. But when you look at Tyreek Hill, he's kind of definitely a worst case example. But Jonathan Taylor, we expected top 5 production. He's got 124 points on the year. Tyreek Hill, you definitely expected top 3 production, probably number 1. And he's got 128 points on the year. They're pretty darn close.
I mean, in redraft leagues, best ball, underdog, whatever, I would wager that Tyreek was a top 3 pick in a lot of leagues.
Yep. And Hill's the McCaffrey of the receiver position. He was the guy that you could get, couple first-round picks to get him. Her owners were asking for him. And the only reason he didn't crack my list is, you know me, man, like the coach of me, he's had some off-field stuff, JB, and it's bothered me a little bit throughout his career and up to this year. And then he was approaching that 30. And, I wasn't a homer like Amari Cooper that hung on to him. Like, I'm telling you, Amari Cooper is the only guy I've hung on that's like pushing 30 on my roster for receivers, I feel. So I wasn't one to want to give up those first-round picks for him. But if you have him, you are totally disappointed. There's no way he should be where he is based on his talent. I know he's got that lingering wrist thing they're talking about. Some reports say it's an issue. Some reports say it's nothing. So I'm not quite sure how much that factors in. Your spreadsheets are definitely accurate. John's definitely cutting into that. But even last week, Waddle kind of was like the man.
He was the man.
Tyreek landed you with 9.8 points, which is it's not good at all. And I have taken a couple weeks where I thought he'd go off in DraftKings, and he has not. So he's been definitely a disappointment and deserves his rating on your list.
Yeah, over the last 7 games, Jonnu Smith, let's go backwards. 11 targets, 8 targets, 4 targets, 6, 6, 7, 8. Like that's, especially with what the way we're hurting at tight end from top to bottom. That's pretty sexual, Dan. I'm getting hot. I'm getting hot and bothered. I don't know. All right, we got to calm down here before I get too excited.
That's fair.
Let's move over to number 1 for you, and then we'll go to number 1 for me, and then we'll wrap it up with final thoughts.
Yeah, number 1 for me is 1,000% Brandon Aiyuk for just so many reasons. First, he holds out, and we had to go through that entire holdout phase. Now, in this offseason, where he impacted me is there were some drafts where, again, depending on how I strategized my roster, I went heavy on quarterback and running back, and either I gambled and made him my wide receiver 1, or because I went really heavy in other positions. Maybe I got the stud tight end and I loaded up a quarterback, super flex, got my 2 quarterbacks, pick the scenarios where he may have been my number 1 or he's my number 2. I got another stud receiver to be my number 1 and he's my number 2. And then from that point on, we had to go through the holdout. Then he signs at the last minute. Then we got to go through him sucking. Just sucks. And then after sucking, he has his temper tantrum. Like he takes his shorts off, throw his gloves on the football field in front of Shanahan. That doesn't fly with Coach Dan. You're not even producing, and you've got an attitude problem after you held out, and we're very immature holding out during the offseason. And then he had like one good week where I'm like, okay, the talent is still there. And then he goes and gets hurt and blows out his knee. So, I didn't want to put anyone on this list that like injury derailed the year, but his year was derailed from his holdout right through, man. And now I'm just, I've traded off where I could trade off for him. I think I got a first-round pick in 1 league for him. I'm just so out on Aiyuk.
Yeah, I mean, like if he was doing well and you put him on this list because of the injury, the red flag was coming out. But it was derailed from the get-go. We have talked about this before. I don't want to get into it and spend too much time on it, but I truly believe that 2023 was the outlier season for him. You look at historically his yards per route run, it was pretty flat. And then like 1.8 to 1.9 jumps off the charts last year. And then this year it was down in that 1.7 range before the injury. So it was kind of back to where he was. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I have no issue but having him as number 1 on the list. He was coming in like teetering on that wide receiver 12 to 15 range for dynasty purposes. And that value is dropping each and every week he took the field before that injury. So let's throw a few trades very quickly. Sutton in a 4th for Brandon Aiyuk, 12-team start 11 half PPR.
If I need to win now, if I'm just a contending roster, period, I will take Sutton. If I am rebuilding, I would still go with the youth.
I have no issue with that. I have Sutton and Aiyuk tiered together, so the 4th isn't going to swing it one way or the other for me, especially in a start 11. If I need the wide receiver, Sutton. If I'm looking towards the future, I'm okay with Aiyuk. So I always say at least one question, I'm a hedge a little bit. Aiyuk and a 25 first for Xavier Worthy and David Montgomery, 12-team Superflex Start 11 PPR.
I'm going to take the first with Aiyuk. That's what's going to get me there. The flip side of that, I'm not super high on Worthy. Mitch would probably take the Worthy side. And Montgomery, I still like him a lot. He's aging a little bit. I'm just leaning towards that first, and Aiyuk will ultimately come back. That's a close one, though. I'd respect it either way.
Montgomery's 27. He's like a fine wine. He is better with age.
He is. And the way they use two backs, I think that'll buy him some time. Just got a new contract, too, which is good.
Yeah. What a Sonic and Knuckles. I made the joke. I really was hoping it was going to get more traction, but I said Craig Reynolds needs to be Tails. Did you remember Sonic and Tails?
I do.
Yeah.
You know, there's some people that aren't as like sickos as us, and they're like, "Who's Craig Reynolds?" But, yeah.
Well, I thought the issue was going to be more who is Tails. But
either or.
Craig Reynolds too. All right, Aiyuk for DJ Moore. I was really surprised by this PPR.
I'm smashing DJ Moore.
Yeah, DJ Moore. He hasn't had like a tremendous season, but only a year older than Brandon Aiyuk, and he's healthy. I'll take DJ Moore. Brandon Aiyuk for Myers in a second. Jakobi Myers in a second. And that's a 25 second, 12-team Superflex Start 11 PPR.
I still hold on to the potential upside of Aiyuk. Let him get healthy and try to sell him for more later. So I'll take Aiyuk.
All right. Number one for me. I'm not going to dig into any numbers because it has been such a disappointment. And I said earlier, I don't really want to bring younger players to the table because there's a lot of time for them to bounce back. But it has just been such a disappointing season for Sam Laporta. He's not demanding targets. You can sit there and point to, well, Jameson Williams is a little bit more involved. It's not like Williams is popping off 10 targets a game. This team is putting up 40, 50 points at times. And Sam Laporta, and you might say, well, it's because he had that really high touchdown rate last year. He's at 11% again. 11% of his receptions are touchdowns. That hasn't changed. He just isn't getting targets. He's not getting receptions. And I think part of that could be, I wanted to look up the numbers for Gibbs and Montgomery to date for their target share as a position group and how that compared to last year. 32 for 58. Let's see here. 60. So 20% target share for running backs right now for the Lions. And if you go to last year, 71, just bear with me, 95, 100, it was around 17%. So a little bit of a discrepancy, but I was going to town on Dalton Kincaid. Well, the first reads, the end zone, it's worse for Laporta. And in the subpar categories, they're neck and neck. It has just been such a disappointment with where Laporta was last year versus where he is now. And Dan, he's getting he's just like Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, and I would disagree with that anyway, but Ben Johnson is a mastermind. And unfortunately, that's in some ways good for fantasy. It's good for Jared Goff. It's good for those running backs, especially with that great O-line. It's good for Sun God. But J-Mo arrived, and now there's only so many mouths to feed. And it is really matchup specific. If J-Mo's eating, there's nothing left on the plate there for Sam Laporta. And they'll sprinkle in Tim Patrick. They'll sprinkle in Brock Wright.
Khalif Raymond.
They'll sprinkle in Khalif Raymond. There's some injury stuff there. There's just so many ways that team could beat you. Detroit's awesome. Let's not let Mitch listen to this portion of the show. His head's big enough, but they're just so awesome. And Laporta's not going to surprise anyone. NFL teams know they've got to prepare for Sam Laporta, so they're preparing for him. But my God, you got to prepare for every receiver on that field. And I watched the game so many times last year where I had J-Mo in DraftKings and he would like just miss or drop, and then he got kind of phased out of the game plan, and they would have to use Laporta. It's not that way this year. Like often J-Mo is the first or second read, and Laporta is like the third, and Goff never has to go that far. So.
Yeah, it's been such a disappointment. But again, like asterisk, the value is it's dropped significantly, but he's still sitting there tight end 3 overall. And there is still like I said, with CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert, it takes like a good 3-game stretch for somebody that has proven it already, especially during their rookie season, for him just like boom, like that, to bounce back up to a top 24 dynasty asset.
Yeah. Like the talent's still there. This isn't a guy like Detroit has to take off the field. Like there are some tight ends that are receiving tight ends, and you could only play them when like someone else is hurt, or like Gesicki comes alive when Higgins is out because they need that receiving type guy. But otherwise, Gesicki's a liability in the offense sometimes as a blocker, so they don't use him. Laporta's a dude. It's just a different kind of offense right now for fantasy. So,
yeah. Like I said, not much more to dig into there, but just I'm extremely frustrated with Sam Laporta. I know all dynasty managers rostering Sam Laporta, especially if they were counting on that production and not just, oh, he's a good dynasty asset. But if you thought like he's a good dynasty asset, but he's going to produce, well, that's hurt you this year.
Yep. And then people gave up an awful lot to get Sam Laporta, man. Like that's
I'm one of those people.
It's understandable too. He fit the description of how you build your roster. You win leagues with Sam Laporta's. Unfortunately, it was last year's Sam Laporta and not this year. So our condolences. Don't give him away. But
no, not giving him away.
Moving forward.
Did you watch Seinfeld?
Love Seinfeld.
The Festivus. So it's right before Christmas, but like this was kind of our Festivus airing of grievances episode. So maybe when Festivus rolls around, we can have like a Thanksgiving episode and talk about guys we're thankful for. Kind of flip the roles here. Hit me with your honorable mentions before we do final thoughts.
Rapid fire honorable mentions. We hit on Stroud by default. Danny Dimes, because I do have some shares. Didn't expect him to just fall off the reservation. We talked about Etienne, Chris Olave, not just that he got injured, but production was skeptical, and his injury is getting a little bit concerning with all those concussions. You yelled at me about Marvin Mims. JP, I really thought Marvin Mims was going to be a thing, man. Like, I just had hope because there was no one else to throw to.
Wait, really quick. Folks, Dan hits me with his list. I said, DM me like your 5 guys. He had Marvin Mims at number 5. I said, you cannot possibly have him as a top 5 disappointment this season. Like, what are we doing here? So I talked some sense into him.
The disappointment was real, JB. The disappointment was real, but I know where you were going, so he only makes honorable mention. Romeo Doubs was a little bit of a sleeper. He's only had like 2 good weeks. Curtis Samuel, I thought he was going to be something in Buffalo. Disappointment. Luke McCaffrey, I'm just hoping he's just so raw because he converted late to wide receiver, and there's a lot of intricacies to learning the receiver position in the NFL. But I really thought he'd be a second half breakout number 2 receiver in Washington. They're a team that's struggling, and he can't pass Noah Brown, and he can't even really get a strong share of number 3. So I'm disappointed there. We talked about Laporta, and then I think as one of the Discord members said, my entire Dallas Cowboys team has been disappointing.
Yeah. For me, CJ Stroud, Deebo Samuel, Jalen Waddle, even though he showed a lot of life this last week, Dalton Kincaid, Michael Pittman, maybe he's also on the trending upwards direction, especially with Josh Downs possibly missing time being week to week. But up to this point, he's been disappointing. Marvin Harrison, but again, I wanted to avoid rookies in this conversation, but he's been disappointing whenever you see what some of these other guys have been doing. Deontay Johnson, my exposure is so high. I actually tweeted out right before we recorded tonight that I need 1 point from Deontay Johnson to win a matchup, and that's not a joke. I don't think I'm going to get 1 point from him tonight. Amari Cooper, so I'm there with Dan, and then Mark Andrews. Oh, and Jonathan Brooks too. People, 4, 5, 6 weeks in, he's going to start to take over. Well, he just saw the field for the first time, and he barely saw the field. So I think we could put him in that bucket based on what folks might have been expecting as the season progressed. All right, Dan, we went to overtime tonight, but sometimes it's necessary. Thank goodness we only did trades on 4 of these guys because this would have been an all-night extravaganza. But for the 270th time, final thoughts. What do you have for our fantastic listeners?
I'll close this out with this. Week 13 and week 14, I think the schedule management is going to be more important than it's ever been all year. You're approaching the playoffs. This week for Thanksgiving week, we've got the 3 Thanksgiving days that we all know and love. But then you also got a Friday game this week with Las Vegas and Kansas City. Nobody's on a bye, but that Thursday, Friday schedule, you really got to watch them and manage your lineups. And then next week, you got to survive 6 teams on a bye. There's some really good quarterbacks on byes. Really make sure you have enough quarterbacks to compete if you still have your trade deadline, if you got to maneuver something. So 2 big weeks coming up, and we wish our Dynasty listeners the best of luck to make the playoffs.
I really hate when we have those 3 Thursday games and that Friday game. Like, obviously, I love it. More football, the better. But a lot of times it's like if you have a questionable player on Sunday or Monday and you're like, do I play a guy that I have for this Thursday matchup? And then you sit him, and then Sunday comes around and the guy that you played is out. And now you're like, well, my other option was Thursday. What do I do? It gets very, very frustrating. Yes. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this week's episode. A little bit different for us, just kind of talking about several of these players without really digging in, I think, more analytically, but a lot of good back and forth, a lot of good conversations, and hopefully we can avoid these landmines moving forward. And just remember, Father Time, he always wins. For Dan Lamagna, Mitch Sorensen, who's cruising and bruising right now, I'm John Bauer. Catch everybody next week. Have a great night.